the great, silent theater of the corporate world, silence is never truly empty. It is not an absence of noise, but a canvas upon which ambition, envy, and betrayal paint their masterpieces. The loudest declarations are often made in the quietest moments, and the most dangerous storms gather not in the clamor of arguments, but in the unnerving calm of a single calculated whisper. For Liam O'Connell, a man who spoke the language of code more fluently than the language of people, silence had always been a sanctuary, a place where complex problems could be untangled and elegant solutions could be born. But on this Tuesday morning, his sanctuary had become a prison. He stood on the cool marble floor outside the Olympus's conference room, a glass box where gods of middle management decided fates. Through the thick, soundproof glass, he could see her, Chloe, his work partner, his confidant, his best and perhaps only friend in this concrete jungle. She was radiant under the recessed lighting, her voice animated, her hands gesturing gracefully towards the massive screen behind her. On that screen were his slides, his data, his architecture, his 6 months of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled breakthroughs, all condensed into a presentation titled Project Chimera. She was speaking his words, weaving the narrative he had practiced in front of his bathroom mirror just last night. And the board, including his own boss, Marcus, was captivated, their faces a mixture of awe and approval. They were applauding his ghost, and the necromancer was the one person he had trusted with its soul. The feeling that washed over Liam wasn't the hot rage he might have expected. It was a cold, creeping void, a numbness that started in his chest and spread to his fingertips. His own reflection in the glass looked pale and foreign, a man locked out of his own life. His access card had been deactivated this morning. His final presentation files mysteriously corrupted. Now he understood. It wasn't an IT glitch, it was a surgical strike. As if on cue, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A single message from Marcus. It read, "Chloe did an amazing job. She showed the kind of leadership initiative we need. We'll talk later." The promise of the senior director position, the one Marcus had dangled in front of him for months, evaporated in that single cruel text. The betrayal was complete, a pincer movement executed by his friend and his mentor. Through the glass, he saw Chloe smile, a brilliant, triumphant smile, as the applause grew louder. A moment later, a privacy screen whirred to life, turning the glass wall an opaque white, and the sound of his stolen future was finally, mercifully, silenced. To understand the depth of the wound, you must first understand the bond that was broken. It was a bond forged in the sterile, recycled air of Innovatech Solutions, a place where innovation was a buzzword printed on coffee mugs, and true genius was often buried under layers of corporate jargon. At the heart of this story are three people, a trinity bound by ambition, talent, and a fatal misunderstanding of one another. First, there was Liam O'Connell, the architect. Liam was a quiet force of nature, a man who saw the world in lines of code and logical progressions. He grew up in a small Midwestern town, the son of a librarian and a carpenter, and from them he inherited a profound respect for structure and a belief that quiet, diligent work was the most honest form of communication. He was not shy, but simply economical with his words, preferring to let the elegance of his software designs speak for him. In the boisterous, backslapping culture of the tech world, Liam was an anomaly. He never networked at company mixers. He didn't play golf with the executives, and he saw office politics as a baffling, inefficient system that distracted from the purity of the work itself. Yet, within the research and development department, he was a legend in his own right. When a critical server migration failed at 3 a.m, it was Liam's number they called. When a competitor launched a feature that seemed impossible to replicate, it was Liam who would retreat into his cubicle for 72 hours and emerge with a solution that was not just a copy, but an evolution. His colleagues respected him, even if they didn't quite understand him. To them, he was the brilliant, slightly awkward engine in the basement, the man who kept the lights on while others took the credit for the beautiful lampshades upstairs. He believed, with a deep and unwavering naivety, that meritocracy was a law of nature, that his work would inevitably be recognized, and that the universe, in its own time, was fundamentally fair. Then there was Chloe Vance, the confidant. If Liam was the architect, Chloe was the master promoter. She was everything Liam was not: effervescent, charismatic, and a social virtuoso. She could remember the names of everyone's children, knew exactly which vice president was a fan of obscure French films, and could translate Liam's dense technical monologues into captivating, persuasive narratives that made executives sign checks. They had started at Innovatech on the same day 5 years ago and had quickly formed a symbiotic, seemingly unbreakable partnership. She saw the untamed genius in him, and he saw a person who could understand his complex ideas without needing a schematic. She became his shield and his translator. She would bring him coffee when he'd been coding for 10 hours straight, pulling him out of his digital trance to make sure he ate. In return, he shared everything with her: his half-formed ideas, his revolutionary concepts, the secret vulnerabilities he found in their existing systems. He would sketch out complex algorithms on a whiteboard, and she would watch, not with the glazed-over eyes of their colleagues, but with a sharp, focused intelligence, asking the precise questions that helped him refine his own thoughts. "We're a team," she would say, and her warm, genuine smile made it impossible for Liam to doubt her. He trusted her implicitly, seeing their partnership as a perfect fusion of skills. He never noticed the subtle way she would rephrase his ideas in meetings to sound like her own insights, or how she would present their joint progress reports with a subtle emphasis on I instead of we. To Liam, these were just semantics. The work was what mattered, and he believed Chloe knew that as well as he did. And finally, there was Marcus Thorne, the judge. Marcus was the director of their division, a man from a bygone era of management who had clung to his position through a mastery of corporate rhetoric. He carried himself with the air of a seasoned general, but he hadn't been in the trenches of a real technical problem for over a decade. He managed perceptions, not people. He loved buzzwords like synergy and disruption, but couldn't tell the difference between Python and Java. Marcus saw Liam as a valuable, if unpolished, asset, a reliable tool. He would often stop by Liam's desk, pat him awkwardly on the shoulder, and say things like, "Keep up the great work, son. Your efforts are not going unnoticed." But these words were fleeting, empty calories of encouragement. It was Chloe who truly captivated Marcus. She spoke his language. In meetings, Liam would present a problem with 3 potential solutions, outlining the technical pros and cons of each with meticulous detail. Marcus would nod slowly, his eyes slightly unfocused. Then, Chloe would step in. "So, to piggyback on Liam's excellent analysis," she'd begin, "Option A offers the most robust, scalable pathway to future-proof our platform, positioning us as market leaders. It's a game changer." Suddenly, Marcus would lean forward, energized. "Yes, a game changer. That's the kind of forward thinking I want to see. Excellent initiative, Chloe." Liam, believing his job was only to provide the data, never saw this as a slight. He thought Chloe was simply doing her part of the job, unaware that in Marcus's eyes, the person who framed the narrative was the one who owned it. This was the ecosystem of Innovatech Solutions, a gleaming, open-plan office designed to foster collaboration, which in reality only made it easier to watch who was having hushed conversations with whom. It was a place where success was measured not just by your output, but by your visibility. And Liam O'Connell, the quiet architect, the silent engine, was about to learn a brutal lesson. He believed he was building a cathedral of logic and innovation. He was unaware that he was simply quarrying the stone for someone else to build their throne. His trust in his friend and his faith in the system were the foundations of his world, and both were about to be fractured beyond repair. The genesis of what would become known as Project Chimera was not born in a sterile, scheduled brainstorming session, but out of quiet desperation. A shadow had fallen over Innovatech Solutions, a shadow cast by their largest and oldest client, Northstar Holdings. Northstar was a behemoth in the logistics industry, and their multi-million-dollar contract was the bedrock upon which Innovatech's quarterly reports were built. But the bedrock was cracking. Innovatech's legacy software, a patchwork of outdated code and clumsy integrations, was buckling under the strain of Northstar's modern demands. Systems crashed during peak hours, data was becoming corrupted, and Northstar's CEO had made it clear during a tense video conference that their patience was not an infinite resource. Panic, a scent that always betrays itself in a corporate environment, began to waft from the executive suites. Marcus would emerge from closed-door meetings looking grim, his usual bluster replaced by a tight-lipped anxiety. The problem was clear. They needed a fix, and they needed it 6 months ago. While teams of project managers drafted proposals for expensive, time-consuming Band-Aid solutions, Liam O'Connell saw something else. He saw a rot in the foundation. For years, he had been the one navigating the labyrinth of the old system, patching its flaws and anticipating its failures. He knew it better than anyone, and he knew it was a lost cause. One night, surrounded by glowing monitors displaying the tangled mess of the system's architecture, he had an epiphany. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated clarity. The solution wasn't to patch the crumbling walls of the castle. It was to build a new one entirely, on a foundation of sleek, efficient, and intelligent design. He wasn't just thinking of a new feature or an upgrade. He was envisioning a complete paradigm shift, a self-learning, predictive system that wouldn't just solve Northstar's current problems, but would anticipate their future needs. He grabbed a marker and turned to the large whiteboard in his deserted section of the office. For the next hour, he sketched, erased, and sketched again, his mind racing. What emerged was the blueprint of a miracle. He stepped back, his heart pounding with the thrill of creation. He had a name for it instantly. Chimera, because it would seamlessly merge the strength of their existing data with the intelligence of a revolutionary new engine. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. There was only one person he could trust to understand the magnitude of his vision without immediately trying to dilute it in a sea of corporate feasibility studies. The next morning, he pulled Chloe into an empty conference room, the energy practically crackling around him. "Forget the patch-up proposals," he said, his voice lower and more intense than usual. "They're trying to fix a leak in a dam that's about to burst. Look." He recreated his late-night sketches on the glass walls, the marker squeaking as it flew. He explained the multi-threaded processing, the neural network for predictive analysis, the secure, modular framework. He spoke for 20 minutes straight, a torrent of technical genius. Chloe listened, her initial look of curiosity transforming into one of genuine astonishment. When he finally finished, breathless, she was silent for a long moment. She walked slowly along the glass wall, tracing the lines of his diagrams with her finger. Then she turned to him, her eyes wide. "Liam," she said, her voice filled with awe, "this isn't a project. It's the future of the company." In that moment, Liam felt a profound sense of validation. She didn't just understand his work, she understood its importance. That conversation marked the beginning of 6 months of grueling, exhilarating work. Their corner of the office became a self-contained ecosystem, fueled by late-night pizza, endless pots of coffee, and a shared sense of purpose. Liam was the architect and the builder, sinking deep into a state of creative flow, often coding for 12 or 14 hours without a break. He was in his element, crafting millions of lines of perfect, efficient code. Chloe became the project's public face and its fiercest guardian. She handled the progress reports, managed the timelines, and ran interference with other departments, ensuring Liam was insulated from the endless distractions of meetings and corporate bureaucracy. Let the genius work, she'd tell anyone who tried to pull him away. He gave her full administrative access to every file, every server, every line of code. He walked her through the most complex modules, explaining his logic, his vision, the very philosophy embedded in the system's core. To him, this was the ultimate expression of trust. To her, it was the ultimate transfer of knowledge. As Chimera grew from a concept on a whiteboard into a functioning, breathtakingly powerful prototype, word began to spread. The rumblings of its potential reached Marcus Thorne's office. One afternoon, he called Liam in. It was the first time Liam had been in Marcus's spacious office since his initial interview. The scent of leather and expensive cologne hung in the air. Marcus gestured for him to sit, a broad, paternal smile on his face. "Liam," he began, leaning back in his throne-like chair, "I've been reading Chloe's reports on Chimera. Astonishing stuff. Truly. He spoke for a few minutes about vision and market disruption, using all his favorite buzzwords. Then, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Look, the top brass is nervous about North Star. This project. This is more than just a project. It's a silver bullet, and the person who delivers that bullet is going to be a hero. He paused for effect, looking Liam directly in the eye. You deliver Chimera, you make this problem go away, and the senior director position is yours. It's a done deal. I've already told the VP of operations that you're my guy. All you have to do is bring it home. Liam walked out of that office feeling like he was floating on air. It was everything he had worked for, the validation he had quietly craved. The first person he told was, of course, Chloe. He found her at her desk, and with a grin wider than any she had ever seen on his face, he recounted the entire conversation. Her reaction was one of pure joy. She jumped up and threw her arms around him in a tight hug. "Oh my God, Liam. You deserve it more than anyone," she exclaimed. "We have to celebrate." They went out for drinks that night, toasting to the future, to Project Chimera, to their partnership. Liam, full of optimism and gratitude, raised his glass. "We did it, Chloe," he said earnestly. "This promotion, it's for both of us. It's our win." Chloe clinked her glass against his, her smile never faltering. "To us," she said, her eyes shining in the dim light of the bar. But had Liam been a student of human nature instead of computer science, he might have seen a flicker in that shine, a brief, predatory glint that was not a reflection of the light, but an emission from a darkness stirring within. He saw a partner celebrating a shared victory. He failed to see a rival who had just been shown the exact location of the prize. The promise of a promotion, once spoken aloud, is a dangerous thing. It ceases to be a hypothetical reward and becomes a tangible object, a prize glittering under the harsh office lights. And once a prize is placed in the center of the arena, it changes the nature of everyone present. For Liam, the promise was fuel, a validation that his quiet, dedicated work had meaning. For Chloe, it was a spark thrown into a reservoir of ambition that ran deeper and darker than Liam could have ever imagined. The shift was not sudden. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the atmosphere between them, like the drop in barometric pressure before a storm. It began 3 weeks before the North Star presentation, the day the final date was locked into the calendars of the entire executive board. The creative, chaotic energy that had defined their work on Chimera began to be replaced by a corporate, deadline-driven tension. It started with a series of seemingly innocent requests. Chloe approached his desk one afternoon, a troubled expression on her face. "Liam," she began, her voice laced with concern. "I was thinking last night, what if something happens? A power surge, a network failure. Your laptop gets stolen. The entire project, all the source code, lives on your machine and your local backups. It's a single point of failure. It's making me incredibly nervous." Liam, who was meticulously organized with his own backup protocols, tried to reassure her, but she persisted. "No, I mean a real, off-site, redundant backup. I spoke with IT, and they've given me access to a secure, encrypted server. Please, just for my peace of mind, can you upload the entire project repository there? I'll manage it. It's the responsible thing to do." Liam saw it as a sign of her commitment, her laudable thoroughness. He spent the afternoon transferring terabytes of data, including the core architecture, the version history, every digital brick and stone of his creation. He handed her the keys to the kingdom, believing she was merely acting as a diligent watchman. A few days later, she was back. "You know," she said, leaning casually against his cubicle wall while he debugged a minor module. "Marcus is a great guy, but he's old school. He doesn't just need to see the work, he needs to see the warrior. He needs to see who's in command of the details." Liam looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "The work is in command." Chloe gave a soft, pitying laugh. "Oh, Liam, that's why I love you. You're too pure for this place. I'm just saying, your presentation style is very technical. It's brilliant for us, but for the board, it might go over their heads. They need the big picture, the story. We need to make sure we don't lose them in the weeds. She was planting a seed, framing his greatest strength, his technical depth, as a potential weakness. She was creating a problem that she, conveniently, was uniquely qualified to solve. She began sharing cautionary tales, stories of brilliant engineers at other companies who were sidelined because they didn't play the game. "My old mentor," she said one evening as they were packing up, "a genius, just like you. He invented a new compression algorithm. His boss presented it at the annual tech summit and got a massive promotion. My mentor's name wasn't even mentioned. He told me later, 'Chloe, it's not enough to build the best thing. You have to be the one standing on the stage when the curtain rises.'" Liam absorbed these stories, a faint unease settling in. He started to wonder if his quiet confidence was indeed a liability. While she was cultivating this doubt in Liam, she was simultaneously executing a masterful campaign of self-promotion, entirely outside of his view. Weaving through the corporate corridors, she was no longer Liam's partner. She was a political operative. She scheduled a series of pre-briefing check-ins with Marcus, framing them as a necessary step to ensure the final presentation was perfectly aligned with his expectations. In his office, her entire demeanor changed. She was poised, confident, and spoke with strategic authority. "Marcus, the core engine Liam developed, is performing beyond all expectations," she would say, cleverly giving Liam his technical due while positioning herself as the one who understood its broader significance. "My focus now is on translating that raw power into a compelling business case. I'm crafting a narrative that speaks directly to shareholder value and long-term market dominance." She would present a few of Liam's own slides, rephrasing his bullet points with powerful corporate language. She made it sound as though Liam had forged the raw materials, but she was the artist sculpting them into a masterpiece. Marcus, who was easily impressed by such performances, saw exactly what he wanted to see: a leader. He saw a confident young woman who could take a complex technical asset and sell it. He was completely unaware that the architect and the artist were supposed to be the same person. Back in the trenches, Liam remained oblivious, his world shrinking to the glow of his monitors as he put the final, loving touches on his creation. He was polishing Chimera to a mirror shine, ensuring every line of code was not just functional, but beautiful. He was in a state of pure focus, deaf to the whispers and machinations happening just meters away. The final, fatal move came on the Friday before the presentation. Chloe came to his desk, holding a tablet. "It's done," Liam said, a tired but proud smile on his face. "The final build is stable, and the presentation is locked and loaded." Chloe's smile was dazzling. "I knew you'd do it. You're a rock star," she said. "Listen, before the weekend, could you do me one last favor? Send me the final version of the slide deck. The whole thing, presenter notes included. I just want to load it onto my tablet and live with it this weekend. I'll read it until I know it backwards and forwards. I want to be ready for any possible question they could throw at us. A fresh pair of eyes to catch any last-minute typos, you know? It sounded like the most logical request in the world. He wanted the presentation to be flawless as much as she did. Without a moment's hesitation, he dragged the file into an email, typed, "Here you go. Let's make history on Tuesday," and hit send. He watched the progress bar complete, a tiny digital confirmation that he had just willingly handed over the keys, the map, and the title deed to his entire future. He then leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to feel a sense of accomplishment, never realizing he wasn't a conquering hero about to be crowned, but a fattened calf, perfectly prepared for slaughter. The night before a triumph is a sacred time. It is a quiet, solitary space filled with the hum of potential and the satisfaction of a long journey nearing its end. For Liam O'Connell, this particular night, the eve of the Chimera presentation, was exactly that. The Innovatic office, usually a cacophony of ringing phones and clacking keyboards, was cathedral quiet at 2 a.m. The only sounds were the gentle whir of the servers, the distant hum of the city below, and the soft clicks of his own mouse. He was alone, bathed in the cool blue light of his triple monitor setup, putting the final, microscopic polishes on his masterpiece. This wasn't work anymore. It was artistry. He ran one last full-scale simulation, watching the data flow through the pathways he had built. A perfect, silent symphony of logic. A sense of profound pride washed over him, a feeling so pure and potent it almost brought him to tears. This project was more than just code. It was a piece of his soul, a testament to his belief that with enough thought and effort, any chaos could be shaped into order. He looked at the final slide of the presentation, a simple, elegant summary of Chimera's potential. At the bottom, he had typed, Lead Architect, Liam O'Connell. Project Strategist, Chloe Vance. It felt right. It felt true. With a final, weary sigh of satisfaction, he saved the file one last time, attached it to an email, and sent it to Chloe. The subject was Final Deck. The body of the message was simple, all done. See you in the morning. It's going to be a big day. He shut down his computer, packed his bag, and walked out into the cool night air, feeling not like an employee leaving the office, but like a painter who had just stepped back from his finished canvas. He slept a deep, dreamless sleep and awoke at 7, the morning sun streaming through his apartment window. The usual pre-presentation jitters were there, but they were outweighed by a calm, steady current of excitement. This was the day his quiet work would finally speak, loudly and clearly. He made coffee, picturing the moment Marcus would announce his promotion, the handshake, the respectful nods from the board. He imagined sharing a celebratory look with Chloe, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. Before getting in the shower, he sat down at his home workstation to do one last, quick review of his speaker notes, wanting the words to be as fluid and perfect as the code itself. He clicked on the company VPN client. A small window popped up. He typed in his password. Connecting. The screen read for a few seconds and then, a blunt, red message. Access denied. Your credentials have been revoked. Liam stared at the message, his brow furrowed in confusion. An IT glitch, he thought. Of all the days for the system to act up. He tried again. Access denied. He tried a third time, typing his password with exaggerated slowness, ensuring each character was correct. The same result. A prickle of unease started to crawl up his spine. This was strange. He grabbed his phone and tried to open his corporate email app. A new message appeared. This account has been locked by your administrator. Now, the unease blossomed into a cold, sharp dread. This wasn't a glitch. A glitch was random. This was specific. This was targeted. His mind raced. Had he violated some new security protocol without realizing it? Was this some kind of company-wide lockdown? He tried the internal messaging system. The app wouldn't even load his profile. He was a ghost, digitally erased from the company he had dedicated the last 5 years of his life to. Panic began its icy ascent from his stomach to his throat. He looked at the clock. 7:35 a.m. The presentation was at 8:30. He called the IT help desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. It went straight to a recorded message. Thank you for calling the Innovatech help desk. Our office hours are from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. He thought of calling Chloe, his finger hovering over her name in his contacts. But he stopped. He didn't want to distract her, to burden her with his technical problems right before their big moment. He made a decision. He would drive. He would get to the office, sort this out with IT in person, and still have time to prepare for the presentation. The drive into the city was a special kind of torture. Every red light felt like a personal conspiracy, every slow driver a saboteur. His mind was a frantic whirlwind, trying to assemble the strange, alarming pieces of the puzzle. The revoked access, the locked accounts. It made no sense. He replayed his final conversations with Chloe, her requests for the source files, for the final presentation. He remembered her concern, her talk of backups and redundancies. He saw it all through the lens of his unwavering trust, and it still appeared as nothing more than the actions of a diligent, caring partner. When he finally pulled into the Innovatech Tower's parking garage, he felt a small wave of relief as the automated arm lifted for his security badge. A good sign. The network issue was probably just with remote access. Everything would be fine. But that flicker of hope was extinguished moments later. At the main turnstiles in the gleaming, cavernous lobby, his badge was denied again. A harsh buzz, a flashing red light. The security guard, a man he'd nodded to 1,000 times, gave him a look of bored indifference. "Badge isn't working, sir. You'll have to sign in at the guest desk." The humiliation was a physical shock, a slap in the face. To be treated as a stranger in his own professional home. Signing the visitor log, he felt a surreal sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else. The elevator ride to the 34th floor was the longest of his life. The silence was absolute, amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. He stepped out onto the familiar gray carpet and walked, his footsteps echoing in the still, empty office. He rounded the corner, heading towards the executive wing where the Olympus conference room was located. He could hear a voice now, its confident, melodic cadence muffled by the glass. It was Chloe's voice. He quickened his pace, a desperate, final hope sputtering in his chest that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. He reached the glass wall and stopped dead, and there it was. The moment that would forever divide his life into a before and an after. Chloe was at the podium, bathed in the glow of the projector. Behind her, on the giant screen, was his first slide, his elegant, custom-designed Chimera logo. Below it, the title, Project Chimera, A New Paradigm. And beneath that, the line that shattered his world into a million pieces, presented by Chloe Vance. His name was gone. Every member of the board was there, Marcus seated at the head of the table, smiling, nodding in encouragement at Chloe. They were not waiting for him. The presentation had already begun. He was not late. He was erased. He placed a hand on the cold, unfeeling glass, his reflection a ghostly witness to his own spectacular execution. Time does not heal all wounds. Sometimes it simply preserves them in amber, allowing the victim to endlessly turn over the moment of impact to study every facet of their own destruction. For Liam, the hour that followed his discovery was such a time. He did not bang on the glass or scream in protest. The shock was too profound, a system crash in his own soul. He simply backed away from the conference room window, a ghost retreating from the scene of his own murder, and found an empty, darkened office down the hall. He sat in a stranger's chair, the city a silent, indifferent panorama outside the window. The world had gone out of focus, the sounds of the office muted, as if coming from underwater. He replayed the scene he had just witnessed, the confident posture of his best friend, the approving smile of his boss, the elegant title slide bearing his work and her name. It was a reality so fundamentally wrong, so grotesquely inverted, that his mind struggled to accept it as anything other than a waking nightmare. But the cold dread coiling in his gut was undeniably real. A white-hot anger began to burn through the fog of disbelief, a clean, purifying rage, and with it, a sliver of desperate, illogical hope. Marcus doesn't know the whole story, a voice in his head whispered. He only saw the presentation. He doesn't know I'm locked out, that she stole everything. Once I explain, he'll fix this. He has to. He gave me his word. That fragile hope was the only thing that kept him from walking out of the building and never looking back. It was the last, dying ember of his faith in the system. He waited, listening to the muffled sounds of the meeting concluding, the distant rumble of applause, a fresh wave of agony. He saw them file out, a procession of smiling executives, all patting Chloe on the back. She was beaming, accepting their praise with a practiced, humble grace. He waited until the crowd dispersed, until she was walking alone toward the elevators, and then he stepped out of the shadows. Chloe. His voice sounded alien to his own ears, a dry, cracked thing. She turned, and for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine shock, perhaps even fear, crossed her face. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of warm, professional concern. "Liam, there you are. I was starting to get worried. Did you hear? They loved it. We did it." The casual, cheerful "we" was a stunningly brazen move, a denial of reality so complete it almost knocked him off balance. "Why couldn't I log in this morning, Chloe?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She feigned a look of surprise. "Oh, that? IT has been a total disaster today, some kind of server migration. Half the department was having issues. "I'm so sorry, I should have texted you. It was so crazy getting set up, I just assumed you were on your way." The lie was so smooth, so plausible, it was almost admirable. "My presentation, Chloe," he pressed, ignoring the fabrication. "My work." Her expression shifted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cool, disappointed patience, the look of a parent about to scold a petulant child. "Our work, Liam." She corrected him gently. "We worked on this together for 6 months. I couldn't have done it without your technical brilliance, and you couldn't have done it without my strategic direction. I just presented our collective effort." He finally felt his own anger break the surface. "You stole it. You stood there and took credit for every single idea, every late night, every line of code. You stole it, and you know it." Her face hardened. The mask was off. "Stole it?" she repeated, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. "I saved it. You were going to get up there and bore them to death with technical jargon. I took your brilliant but incomprehensible work, and I made it sing. I did what was necessary to get the project approved and funded for the good of the company. And yes, for us. I showed leadership. I took initiative, something you seem incapable of doing. This isn't about ego, Liam. This is about success. I saw the path to victory, and I took it. That's not theft, that's business. It's time you learned the difference." She adjusted the strap of her laptop bag, the picture of composure. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a follow-up meeting with Marcus." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the hallway, the shrapnel of her words embedded in his gut. Reeling, his last hope dwindling, he walked to Marcus's office. The door was ajar, and he could hear Marcus on the phone, his voice booming with enthusiasm. "Absolutely, Bob. A total home run. The girl's a rock star, a real killer instinct." He saw Liam hovering at the door and waved him in, finishing his call with a final hearty laugh. "Liam, come on, son. What a morning, eh?" Chloe just knocked it out of the park. Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement. Liam closed the door behind him. "Marcus," he began, his voice strained but controlled. "We need to talk about what just happened." Chloe presented my work. My entire project. The one you and I discussed. The one you promised me the senior director position for. He quickly laid out the facts, the locked accounts, the stolen presentation, the erasure of his name. He spoke with the desperate conviction of a man telling the undeniable truth, expecting, at the very least, a fair hearing. Marcus's celebratory expression slowly faded as Liam spoke. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes narrowing. He let the silence hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment after Liam finished. "All right," Marcus said finally, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. It was flat, managerial, final. "I've heard your side. Now let me tell you what I saw. I saw a confident, capable executive take command of a high-stakes presentation and win over a room of skeptical board members. I saw someone who didn't just present data, but who presented a vision. I saw leadership." Liam stared at him, incredulous. "But it was my vision, my data. She had nothing to do with its creation." Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. "That's where you're wrong. This isn't a science fair, Liam. It's not about who shows the most work. It's about who delivers the result." She delivered. "You, on the other hand, are in my office complaining about credit. It's a bad look. It's petty. The injustice of it was suffocating. The promise, the months of praise, the pats on the back, it was all meaningless. It was a currency Marcus had spent to buy Liam's labor, and it was now worthless. So what now?" Liam asked, his voice hollow. Marcus smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "Now, you demonstrate that you're a team player. As of this morning, I've officially promoted Chloe to Senior Director of Project Development. Her first task is to oversee the full implementation of Chimera, and your new role is to support her. You will report directly to her. You will provide her with any and all technical assistance she requires to ensure a smooth rollout. I trust you'll give her your unconditional cooperation." The words landed like body blows. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a public execution, followed by a sentence of indentured servitude. He was being ordered to help his own thief furnish the palace she had stolen from him. Marcus leaned forward. "Are we clear?" It was not a question. It was a threat. Liam stood there, the architect of a miracle, demoted to a janitor in his own cathedral. All he could do was nod. A crown, once seized, must be worn. And Chloe Vance, in the first days of her reign as senior director, wore hers with a dazzling, if hollow, brilliance. She moved into the spacious corner office that should have been Liam's, the nameplate on her door gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her first official act was to send a company-wide email, a masterpiece of corporate prose filled with phrases like synergistic alignment, paradigm-shifting strategy, and a new era of client-centric innovation. It was a declaration of victory, a victory lap in written form. To the uninitiated, she was the picture of a dynamic new leader. But to the small team of developers who had worked in the trenches of Chimera, the words were as empty as the promises she had broken. The truth, they knew, was not written in emails, but in code. And the new queen, they were about to discover, was illiterate. The first sign of trouble appeared in her inaugural team meeting. Chloe stood at the head of the conference table, radiating confidence, as she outlined her 90-day implementation roadmap. It was a beautiful presentation, full of impressive charts and ambitious deadlines she had copied from Liam's original project plan. But then, a junior developer, a young man named Ben, who genuinely revered Liam's work, raised his hand. "Chloe," he asked, "regarding the API integration with Northstar's legacy inventory system, are we planning to use a stateless or stateful approach for the token exchange?" Liam's original spec mentioned both as possibilities, depending on their server-side latency. The room fell silent. It was a simple, practical question, but it was a question about the deep mechanics of the system. Chloe's confident smile faltered for a half-second. The question was in a language she did not speak. "That's an excellent granular point, Ben," she said, her voice a little too bright. "We'll need to deep dive on the technicals. I want you and Liam to form a subcommittee to analyze the optimal pathway and report back to me." It was a masterful deflection, but everyone in the room understood what had just happened. She had been tested, and she had failed. She had immediately, reflexively, used Liam as a shield. Liam, seated at the far end of the table, simply nodded, his face a perfect, unreadable mask of professional neutrality. This became the pattern. The reality of implementing a project as complex as Chimera was a war fought on 1,000 fronts, and Chloe was a general who knew nothing of tactics. Small, insidious bugs began to crawl out of the woodwork. Data synchronization errors between Chimera and Northstar's older databases were creating phantom inventory orders. The predictive analytics engine, Liam's pride and joy, was throwing out bizarre, nonsensical forecasts. These were not simple fixes. They were complex architectural problems that required an almost telepathic understanding of the system's core logic. Chloe, in her magnificent office, would stare at the error logs Liam had designed. To him, they were a precise diagnostic map. To her, they were hieroglyphics. Her attempts to manage the crisis consisted of calling more meetings, demanding more status reports, and using phrases like, "We need to think outside the box, people." The team grew sullen and unproductive. They knew the answer to every problem was sitting at a small desk in the corner, being deliberately ignored. Finally, her hand was forced. A particularly nasty bug was causing the entire system to crash for several minutes every afternoon, and Northstar was starting to make angry phone calls. Chloe summoned Liam to her office. He walked in and stood before her desk, his posture respectful, but his eyes cold and distant. He was an employee, nothing more. "Liam," she began, trying to sound authoritative, "the intermittent stability issue is becoming a top priority. I need a full diagnostic and a solution. Immediately." Liam looked at her, his expression unchanged. "Have you checked the kernel panic logs on the primary server?" he asked. "They should give you a timestamp and an error code." She waved a hand dismissively. "I don't have time to dig through logs. I need you to tell me what's wrong." Liam's response was calm and precise. That would be speculation. The correct procedure, as outlined in the system documentation I wrote, is to analyze the logs to determine the root cause. Without that data, any action would be irresponsible. He was not refusing to help. He was performing his job exactly as it was defined, offering no creativity, no intuition, no genius. He was offering her only the cold, hard process. He was giving her nothing for free. The dynamic was excruciating for her. She had stolen the title of architect, but she could not steal the architect's mind. His cold, robotic compliance was a form of resistance more effective than any outburst. He did exactly what she asked, but his minimalist responses forced her to expose her own ignorance with every follow-up question. Where are the logs? On the shared drive, under system, admin, divided by diagnostics. How do I access them? With the administrative credentials you now possess. Each interaction was a fresh humiliation. The warmth, the easy collaboration, the creative fire they once shared was gone, replaced by this sterile, infuriatingly professional emptiness. He was a mirror, reflecting her own incompetence back at her in perfect, high-fidelity detail. The team saw it all. They saw her helplessness in meetings. They saw Liam, the deposed king, being summoned to the throne room only to offer a cryptic, single-sentence piece of advice before being dismissed. Their loyalty began to shift, solidifying around Liam in a silent, unspoken pact. They started to protect him. When Chloe would try to assign Liam a menial task, another developer would interject, "Chloe, Liam is the only one who understands the encryption module. His time is probably better spent there." They began to answer her questions with, "That's a complex issue. Liam's original documentation on that is very thorough. We should all probably start there." They were building a fortress of process and procedure around Liam, using Chloe's own corporate jargon as the bricks and mortar. They had all come to understand the new reality. Chloe Vance was the senior director in name only. The true center of gravity, the man whose silence held more power than all her frantic commands, was Liam O'Connell. And Chloe, alone in her glass office late at night, staring at a screen filled with the elegant, indecipherable poetry of his code, was beginning to understand that she had not conquered a kingdom, but had merely trapped herself in the throne. A master craftsman always signs his work. For a painter, it is a flourish of a brush in the corner. For a writer, a turn of phrase that is uniquely their own. For a programmer of Liam O'Connell's caliber, the signature was not something so overt. It was an invisible mark of quality, a feature so deeply embedded in the system's foundation that only another master would even know to look for it. It was not a malicious bug or a vengeful piece of malware. Liam's code was clean, his ethics unshakable. No, it was a feature born of profound foresight and an uncompromising commitment to security. He called it the System Integrity Key, a time-locked validation protocol that served as the system's cryptographic heartbeat. In essence, it was a self-destruct sequence for a stolen masterpiece. The protocol was designed to prevent the very thing that had happened, the unauthorized operation and reverse engineering of his proprietary architecture. At the moment of its final compilation on Innovatech's main server, a silent, 30-day countdown had begun. To prevent a total system shutdown at the end of that cycle, a unique 256-bit renewal key had to be entered. This was not a simple password. It was a complex cryptographic string generated by a separate offline algorithm that Liam, and only Liam, possessed. This was not a secret. It was not a trap hidden in the shadows. It was a critical security procedure, detailed in its own chapter, in the 1,400-page technical documentation he had written. The chapter was titled, in bold, red letters, Section 9, Critical System Integrity and 30, Day Authentication Renewal. He had explained its purpose, its function, and the absolute necessity of its renewal with meticulous clarity. But in her haste to claim ownership of Chimera, Chloe had performed a cursory rebranding of the documents. She had replaced his name with hers on the cover page, updated the title, and then, deeming his exhaustive appendices to be overly granular and unnecessary for executive review, she had deleted the entire final section. She had torn the most important page out of the instruction manual because she was too arrogant to read it. Liam knew this. He had seen the butchered version of his documentation on the shared drive. He knew the countdown was proceeding, a silent, digital march toward a preordained conclusion. He did not need to act. He did not need to sabotage anything. All he had to do was wait. He had built a beautiful, complex clock, and he had handed it to someone who didn't know it needed to be wound. He was simply waiting, with the calm patience of a watchmaker, for the ticking to stop. The 30th day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal coronation. This was the day of the official, final demonstration for North Star Holdings. It wasn't just a project update, it was a go-live event. On a massive video screen in the Olympus conference room, the entire North Star executive team, including their notoriously demanding CEO, would be watching. In the room itself, Marcus and several members of Innovatech's board had gathered to witness Chloe's crowning achievement. The atmosphere was electric. The past few weeks had been a struggle, but with Liam's sterile and precise assistance, most of the surface-level bugs had been squashed. Chloe, her confidence restored, was radiant. This was her moment to silence any doubters, to cement her position, to prove she was the visionary leader Innovatech needed. She had explicitly made sure Liam was not on the invite list. He was to remain at his desk, a technician on standby, far from the spotlight he supposedly did not want, and certainly, in her mind, did not deserve. The presentation began at 10 in the morning. Chloe was flawless. She moved with the grace of a seasoned performer, her voice a confident and compelling symphony of business speak and technological promise. She guided the rapt audience through the elegant user interface, the real-time logistics tracking, the seamless data integration. The North Star CEO, a man whose smile was a rare and valuable commodity, was visibly impressed, nodding along to her key points. Marcus sat in the front row, beaming with a pride that was almost paternal. He leaned over to the chief financial officer and whispered, "That's my director, a real killer." Chloe could feel the victory in her grasp. It was more intoxicating than she had ever imagined. And for the grand finale, she announced, her voice resonating with theatrical flair, "I will now demonstrate the feature that truly sets Chimera apart, its predictive analytics engine. The system will now analyze over a decade of North Star's logistical data to accurately predict and model supply chain stressors for the upcoming fiscal quarter. It will identify bottlenecks before they happen." This was it, the jewel in the crown, the heart of Liam's genius. The time was 10:29 a.m. The 30-day countdown clock, ticking silently on a server 3 floors below them, had 45 seconds left. "Prepare to be amazed," Chloe said with a triumphant smile, and with a dramatic flourish, she clicked the Execute Analysis button on the screen. For a breathtaking second, it worked. Complex charts began to form, data points swirling into elegant visualizations. A gasp of admiration went through the room. The North Star CEO leaned closer to his camera, his eyes wide. And then, it happened. The screen flickered once. The beautiful charts and graphs vanished. The sleek interface dissolved into nothingness. They were replaced by a stark, black screen and a single line of blinking, white, monospaced text. It was not a user-friendly error message. It was a digital tombstone. It read, "System authentication failure. Cryptographic key expired. Kernel panic." The blinking cursor was the only thing moving in the room. The system wasn't frozen. It was dead. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the Olympus conference room, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Chloe stood frozen, her hand still on the mouse, her face a bloodless mask of horror. On the video screen, the North Star CEO's impressed expression had transformed into one of cold, simmering fury. Marcus's proud smile had collapsed into a gaping maw of disbelief. The ticking had stopped. The time bomb, hidden in plain sight, had just detonated, not with a fiery explosion, but with a silent, catastrophic finality that was infinitely more complete. The blinking cursor on the black screen was a metronome, counting down the final seconds of Chloe Vance's career. The silence in the Olympus conference room was not empty. It was thick with the suffocating pressure of a $50 million contract evaporating into thin air. The first to break it was the face of the North Star CEO on the video monitor. His voice, which had been warm and engaged just moments before, was now a blade of ice. "What in the hell is this, Marcus?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "You bring me in for this amateur hour? For a system that crashes and burns? Don't call us. We'll call you." The screen went black. The connection was severed. He was gone. A collective gasp went through the Innovatech board members. The CFO was already muttering about disclosure protocols and the inevitable stock hit. Marcus Thorne sat paralyzed, the blood draining from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of terror. All eyes were on him. The CEO of Innovatech, a formidable man named Davenport, rose slowly from his chair, his gaze fixed on Marcus. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My office," he said, the two words landing like a death sentence. "Now." Chows erupted. The board members began speaking in hushed, furious tones. Chloe stood frozen at the podium, stammering apologies to a room that was no longer listening to her. The authority and charisma she had projected were gone, replaced by the raw, pathetic panic of a fraud who had been caught. As Marcus stumbled out of the room towards his execution, Chloe collapsed into a chair, her mind a screaming vortex of failure and fear. The walk to Davenport's top-floor office was the longest of Marcus's life. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. For 10 minutes, he stood before the CEO's desk and endured a tirade of controlled, surgical fury. Davenport didn't yell. He dissected. He laid out the financial repercussions, the reputational damage, the sheer, idiotic incompetence of allowing such a public failure. "This isn't just a lost contract, Marcus," Davenport concluded, his voice chillingly calm. "This is a contagion. It makes every client we have question our stability. You have until the end of the day to give me a full post-mortem and a mitigation plan. And that plan had better include the name of the person responsible for this debacle, or that name will be yours." Marcus left the CEO's office not as a director but as a cornered animal. Survival, raw and primal, was his only instinct. He stormed back down to the 34th floor, his mind racing. He wasn't thinking about the code, or the system, or the client. He was thinking about a sacrifice, a body to put on the altar to appease the angry gods of the C-suite. He burst into Chloe's new office. She was sitting at her desk, staring blankly at the wall, a picture of catatonic despair. "What the hell was that?" Marcus roared, slamming the door behind him. Chloe flinched. I don't know," she stammered. "It was working perfectly yesterday. It was flawless. This can't be an accident. It has to be sabotage." The word hung in the air between them. Sabotage. It was a lifeline, a way out. A narrative that didn't star them as the incompetent fools who had crashed the company's most important project. Marcus seized it instantly. "Sabotage," he repeated, the idea taking root. "Who?" Chloe looked up at him, a flicker of her old, calculating intelligence returning to her eyes. They both knew the answer before the name was spoken. There was only one person with the skill, the access, and most importantly, a motive. "Liam," she whispered. A new malevolent energy filled the room. Their shared panic coalesced into a shared purpose. They were no longer adversaries, but co-conspirators. "He's been different ever since the promotion," Chloe said, the story beginning to weave itself. "Distant, cold. He was being uncooperative, giving me one-word answers, making me beg for help. He was resentful. He must have built some kind of poison pill into the code, a time bomb set to go off." Marcus nodded eagerly, adding his own bricks to the wall of lies. "His behavior has been insubordinate. I have a record of it. And the locked account. Why was he locked out this morning? Because he knew this was going to happen. He locked his own account to create an alibi, to make it look like he wasn't involved." Their fiction was becoming fact in their minds. They had found their villain. They transformed from panicked executives into determined, vengeful prosecutors. For the next hour, they locked themselves in Chloe's office and began to manufacture their case. They scoured Liam's email history. His calm, professional, by-the-book responses were twisted into damning evidence. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing at an email on the screen. Chloe asks for a direct solution, and he replies by telling her to consult the documentation. That's not being professional, that's deliberate obstruction. It's a clear pattern of insubordination. They pulled his latest performance review, which Marcus himself had written just months before, filled with glowing praise for his technical skills. He's brilliant, but he's a poor team player, Marcus dictated, as Chloe typed a new, backdated addendum. He struggles with collaboration and shows resentment when his ideas are not the sole focus. He's a lone wolf, a potential liability on a team project. They were creating a monster, a caricature of a bitter, vengeful employee. They built a narrative where Liam, consumed by jealousy, decided to burn everything to the ground rather than see his former friends succeed. Every piece of their own deception was cleverly repurposed as a piece of his. Their act of locking him out was now his alibi. His silence in the face of their provocations was now his simmering rage. His genius, the very thing they had exploited, was now the weapon he had used to attack the company. By the time they were finished, they had a thin folder of out-of-context emails, backdated performance notes, and a story so compelling they had started to believe it themselves. They had their scapegoat, trussed and ready for the slaughter. Marcus, his face now set with a grim, righteous certainty, picked up his desk phone. He buzzed the direct line to the head of human resources. "Cynthia," he said, his voice steady and grave, "I'm calling to report a critical incident. We have a confirmed case of deliberate employee sabotage on the Chimera project, resulting in catastrophic business losses." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I need you to partner with security. A formal termination needs to be processed immediately, and the employee needs to be escorted from the premises. His name is Liam O'Connell." The emergency board meeting was convened in the penthouse conference room, a sterile sanctuary of glass and steel perched high above the city. It was a room designed for executions, both corporate and financial. The mood was funereal. The members of the board, a collection of stern-faced men and women who measured life in quarterly earnings, were seated around a vast mahogany table that reflected their grim expressions like a dark mirror. At the head sat CEO Davenport, his face a thundercloud, and to his right, seated with an air of rehearsed solemnity, were Marcus Thorne and Chloe Vance. They were dressed for their roles, the concerned director and the wronged protege. They had their folder of fabricated evidence. They had their story straight. They were ready to deliver the killing blow. Liam was led into the room not by security, but by a tight-lipped HR manager who gestured for him to take the single chair placed at the far end of the table. It was a deliberate piece of staging, a defendant's dock. He was utterly isolated, a lone figure at the end of a long, polished expanse of wood, facing his accusers and his judges. As he walked the length of the room, a profound silence fell. All eyes were on him. They expected to see a man who was broken, or angry, or afraid. Instead, they saw a man who was unnervingly, preternaturally calm. He met their gazes without flinching, his expression not one of defiance or despair, but of quiet, resolute patience. He sat, placed his hands on the table, and waited. His composure was a discordant note in their carefully orchestrated drama, and it clearly unsettled both Marcus and Chloe. Davenport began, his voice cold and formal. "This emergency session of the board has been called to address the catastrophic failure of the Project Chimera demonstration and the subsequent allegations of employee sabotage. Director Thorne, the floor is yours." Marcus stood, his face a mask of grave responsibility. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport," he began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "It is with a heavy heart that I report a profound breach of professional ethics and trust. We have uncovered a deliberate, malicious effort by a single employee to destroy this project from within." He proceeded to lay out their fiction, weaving a tale of a disgruntled engineer, bitter over a missed promotion, who chose to exact revenge on the company. He presented Liam's pattern of insubordination, his refusal to cooperate, and his suspicious remote account being locked as clear evidence of a guilty mind. He spoke with the conviction of a man who had repeated a lie so many times it had become his truth. Then it was Chloe's turn. She remained seated, projecting an air of wounded vulnerability. "I worked with Liam for 5 years," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I considered him a partner, a friend. I saw his resentment after I was promoted, but I never believed he would be capable of this. He became distant, obstructive. When I asked for his help, he would respond with cold, cryptic emails." She signaled to Marcus, who projected one of Liam's emails onto the large screen. It was his professional, by-the-book response about consulting the documentation. To the uninformed board, stripped of all context, it looked curt and unhelpful. This wasn't just an attack on Innovatech, Chloe concluded. A single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was an attack on me. It was a betrayal I will never fully comprehend. Her performance was flawless. A few board members nodded sympathetically. The trap was set. The narrative was sealed. Davenport turned his icy gaze to the end of the table. "Mr. O'Connell," he said, the name sounding like an indictment, "you have heard the evidence presented by your director and your senior director. These are the most serious allegations this company can level against an employee. Before this board votes on your immediate termination and the pursuit of all available legal remedies against you, do you have anything whatsoever to say in your own defense?" The room was still. The moment of judgment had arrived. Chloe and Marcus exchanged a look of grim triumph. Liam looked up, not at Davenport, but past him, towards the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He didn't need them. At that exact moment, the oak doors swung silently, smoothly open. Every head in the room turned. Standing in the doorway was a man no one had expected to see. He was in his late 70s, dressed not in a sharp business suit, but in a simple, elegant tweed jacket. He was not physically imposing, yet he radiated an aura of quiet, foundational power that instantly dwarfed everyone else in the room, including the CEO. A wave of stunned recognition washed over the board. It was Jonathan Sterling, the brilliant, reclusive founder of Innovatech, the man who had built the company from nothing and hadn't set foot in the boardroom in nearly a decade. Before anyone could recover, Sterling took a slow step into the room. He was not alone. Flanking him was a stern-looking woman with a leather briefcase, his personal counsel. And walking calmly at his other side, matching him step for step, was Liam. Or rather, Liam was no longer there. The chair at the end of the table was empty. He was already with them. The sight of Liam, the condemned man, entering the room alongside the company's patriarch, was a visual paradox so stunning it broke the reality of the scene. Davenport shot to his feet. "Mr. Sterling, we had no idea you were coming." Sterling glided to the head of the table, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, sweeping across the stunned faces of the board. He looked at Marcus and Chloe, whose faces had gone from triumphant to ashen gray with terror. "Please don't let me interrupt," Sterling said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "I was just beginning to enjoy the fiction." He then turned his gaze upon Liam, not with judgment, but with a look of warm, familial pride. He gestured to the empty, high-backed chair next to Davenport's, a seat of honor reserved for the chairman. "Liam," he said, his voice softening just enough for the entire room to hear the affection within it. "I believe this seat is yours." The world tilted. The accused was not a defendant after all. He was the heir to the throne. Liam O'Connell, the quiet architect, walked the length of the table, no longer a victim on his way to the gallows, but a prince returning to claim his kingdom. The looks of pure, unadulterated horror on the faces of Marcus Thorne and Chloe Vance were a spectacle of silent, beautiful ruin. The gambit was over. Checkmate. As Liam O'Connell took his seat beside the founder of Innovatech, the atmosphere in the boardroom didn't just change, it inverted. The gravitational pull of power, which had been centered on CEO Davenport and the accusing duo of Marcus and Chloe, now swung with dizzying force to the quiet old man and his silent nephew. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost walk through a wall. Chloe Vance's face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated terror. The carefully constructed reality they had spent the last 24 hours building had been annihilated by a single, impossible revelation. They were no longer the prosecutors. They were insects under a microscope. Jonathan Sterling surveyed the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on the horrified faces of Marcus and Chloe. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it filled the cavernous room with an absolute, undeniable authority. For the last 5 years, he began, his eyes sweeping over the board members, I have been conducting an experiment. I wanted to understand the company I built, not from the detached comfort of the chairman's office, but from the heart of the engine room. I wanted to find the people with integrity, with vision, with character. So I asked my nephew, Liam, the most brilliant and ethical engineer I have ever known, to do something difficult. I asked him to work amongst you, without title or privilege, to let his work speak for itself, and to simply observe. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He then fixed his steely gaze directly on Marcus and Chloe. And what he observed, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, was a rot of petty ambition, of deceit, and of profound corporate cowardice. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a simple black fountain pen on the polished mahogany table. Marcus, you may recognize this. You commented on it once, said it was a fine writing instrument. Marcus stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. This pen, Sterling continued, was a gift, but it also has a rather remarkable feature. A high-fidelity, voice-activated audio recorder. Sterling's lawyer, without a word, connected a small cable from the pen to the room's integrated sound system. A soft hiss filled the speakers, and then a voice, undeniably Marcus Thorne's, boomed through the room, dripping with false sincerity. You deliver Chimera, and that senior director's office is yours. I've already put your name forward. It's just a formality at this point. The sound of his own broken promise, preserved in perfect clarity, caused Marcus to physically recoil. The recording shifted, and now Chloe's voice filled the room, cold and sharp from her hallway confrontation with Liam. I did what was necessary to get the project approved. This is how the real world works. It's time you learned the difference. Before the board could fully process the audio evidence, Liam himself spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the rage he was so entitled to feel. If you would direct your attention to the main screen, he said. With a few keystrokes on a laptop he'd brought with him, the giant monitor at the front of the room flickered to life. It displayed not a presentation, but a command line interface, a scrolling wall of text and timestamps. This is the access log for my private, off-site server, where I have maintained a version-controlled backup of every single module of Project Chimera since its inception. As you can see, there are over 4,000 time-stamped entries, logged automatically every time I saved my work over the past 6 months. It is an unforgeable cryptographic record of creation. The board stared, mesmerized, at the undeniable, overwhelming proof of his authorship. Then, a new window appeared on the screen. It was a page from a PDF with a large, red, bolded title. Section 9, Critical System Integrity and 30-Day Authentication. Renewal. And finally, Liam said, his voice turning clinical, the catastrophic system failure. It was not sabotage. It was the predictable and documented outcome of failing to renew a standard, 256-bit security key, a critical feature, not a bug. A feature that was detailed on page 1342 of the technical documentation. He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. The documentation you received, altered, and it would seem, failed to read. The unmasking was complete. There was nowhere left for them to hide. Their lies had been stripped away, layer by layer, until only their naked, pathetic ambition remained. Chloe stared at the tabletop, her entire body trembling. Marcus was attempting to speak, but only incoherent, sputtering sounds came out. He was trying to apologize, to explain, to bargain, but his words failed him. He was a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. Jonathan Sterling stood up, his movement signaling the end of the trial and the beginning of the sentencing. Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. for gross managerial negligence, for breach of contract, and for conspiring to knowingly defraud this board and this company. You are terminated, effective this second." He then turned to Chloe. "Chloe Vance, for the brazen theft of intellectual property, for slander, and for your pivotal role in this disgusting conspiracy, you are also terminated, effective this second." He wasn't finished. "You have both caused irreparable damage to our relationship with a key client and have exposed this company to significant financial liability. Our legal department will be in contact with you regarding a civil action to recoup those damages. Furthermore, we will be turning over all of this evidence," he gestured to the pen and the screen, "to the district attorney's office. Let them decide if your actions constitute criminal fraud." The threat of prison hung in the air, a final, devastating blow. Sterling then pressed a button on the large conference phone in the center of the table. "Security," he said calmly. "Please come to the penthouse boardroom. We have 2 individuals who will require an escort from the building." The wait for the security guards was an eternity of silent humiliation. When they arrived, 2 large, uniformed men, they moved with quiet efficiency. Marcus and Chloe were instructed to place their company phones, laptops, and ID badges on the table. They complied, their movements slow and robotic. They were then asked to stand. As they were led on their final walk of shame past the silent, staring members of the board, past Liam, and toward the heavy oak doors, the full weight of their ruin was visible on their faces. The throne they had schemed and lied and betrayed to capture had vanished, and they were left with nothing. The door clicked shut behind them, a soft, final sound that marked the definitive end of 2 careers and the righteous beginning of a new one. In the aftermath of the storm, a profound quiet settled over the penthouse boardroom. The departure of Marcus and Chloe had been a cleansing, a violent expulsion of a sickness that had festered in the heart of the company. The remaining board members, humbled and visibly shaken, looked at Liam with a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and profound respect. The man they had been prepared to condemn just minutes earlier was now, unquestionably, the most powerful person in the room. Without a word, Liam, accompanied by his uncle and CEO Davenport, went to the main technology hub. In the cool, humming sanctuary of the server room, Liam sat at a terminal. His fingers, which had been still and patient for so long, now flew across the keyboard with a dancer's grace. He entered a series of complex commands, his eyes scanning the scrolling lines of code. Then, with a final, decisive keystroke, he entered the 256-bit renewal key. On the main monitor, the stark, white letters of the kernel panic error vanished, replaced instantly by the elegant, vibrant interface of Project Chimera. The system was not just restored, it was purring, stable, and more powerful than ever. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. The catastrophe that had nearly sunk a $50 million contract was, for its creator, a trivial fix. It was a silent, stunning demonstration of the chasm between true mastery and fraudulent authority. The next day, the board convened again. This time, there was no trial, only penance. They offered Liam a formal, effusive apology, and then a crown. "Liam," CEO Davenport announced, his voice filled with a newfound reverence, "in light of your extraordinary contributions and the leadership vacuum that has been created, the board has unanimously voted to offer you the position of Executive Vice President of Technology with immediate effect." It was a title far grander than the one he had been denied, a seat at the very top of the corporate pyramid. The room waited for his grateful acceptance. But Liam, with the same quiet calm he had displayed all along, politely shook his head. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport, and thank you to the board," he said, his voice steady. "But I must respectfully decline. I have no desire to inherit Marcus Thorne's title, nor do I wish to spend my days in budget meetings and performance reviews. That is not my purpose. My purpose is to build." He stood and walked to the large whiteboard, the same kind he had used to first sketch out his vision for Chimera. He picked up a marker. "Innovatech's greatest asset isn't its market share or its real estate," he explained, as he began to draw a new kind of organizational chart. "It's the untapped genius of its engineers. But that genius is being stifled by bureaucracy. by politics, by a culture that rewards performance over substance. I don't want a promotion into that system. I want to build a new one. He outlined his vision for Innovatic Labs, a semi-autonomous research and development division, a sanctuary for pure innovation. It would be a flat, meritocratic organization, insulated from the pressures of quarterly reports, where the only metric for success was the brilliance of the idea. He, Liam, would lead it, but not as a director. As an architect, he would report not to middle management, but directly to the CEO and the board. He wasn't asking for a job, he was presenting a new future for the entire company. When he finished, the board was silent, not with confusion, but with the awe of men who were recognizing true leadership for the first time. They had offered him a throne in their old, crumbling castle. He, in return, had handed them the blueprint for a new one. His proposal was approved without a single dissenting vote. Later that week, Liam stood with his uncle, Jonathan Sterling, in the now empty corner office that had briefly belonged to Chloe. "You handled that with grace, Liam," Sterling said, looking out at the city. "You didn't just expose the rot, you're building a cure." Liam was quiet for a moment. "There's one thing I still don't understand," he said. "The risk. North Star Holdings. They were ready to walk. We could have lost everything." Sterling smiled, a small wry twinkle in his eye. "Jim Connors, the CEO of North Star," he said, "is my oldest friend. We've been playing golf for 30 years. He's also a terrible actor, but I must say he gave an Oscar-worthy performance as the furious client." Liam stared at him, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "The whole thing?" he asked, incredulous. "The whole thing," Sterling confirmed. "The threatened contract was the crucible, a manufactured crisis. I needed to see what Marcus and Chloe would do under real pressure. Would they take responsibility, or would they search for a sacrifice? They gave me my answer. The entire affair had not been a tragedy he had stumbled into. It was a meticulously designed test, and he had been the control variable. Months later, Innovatic Labs was a reality. It was a vibrant, chaotic, and brilliant space, filled with whiteboards, prototypes, and the focused hum of genius at work. Liam moved through the room not as a boss, but as a collaborator, his quiet presence a source of guidance and inspiration. He had his own office, but he rarely used it. He preferred to be in the engine room. One evening, he stood looking out the large window, the city lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars. He had not sought revenge. He had not reveled in the destruction of his enemies. Their ruin was simply a byproduct of their own choices. His justice, he realized, was not the act of tearing something down. It was the act of building something better in its place. He had not climbed the ladder. He had designed a whole new way to fly. And in the quiet hum of his new creation, a final, resonant truth emerged, a lesson for all who work within the silent, glass-walled arenas of the modern world. Never, ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For when they finally decide to act, they do not simply speak, they reshape the world. Thank you for listening to this story. What hidden truths about the workplace should we uncover next? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and join us again for another tale of ambition, betrayal, and the quiet, calculating pursuit of justice.